In life, most people move through the world reacting instead of understanding. Marcus Aurelius understood something most never learn. Your peace is not found in controlling the world, but in mastering your mind. The lessons he left behind were not meant to impress, but to awaken. And if you pay attention, they can completely change how you see yourself, your struggles, and your purpose. One of the most powerful ideas you must understand is that everything outside your mind is temporary. Your possessions, your status, even the opinions of others, none of these stay fixed. People will praise you today and forget you tomorrow. Circumstances will rise and fall without asking for your permission. Marcus Aurelius taught that when you stop clinging to what you cannot control, you stop suffering unnecessarily. The real strength is not in holding on tighter, but in letting go wisely. Another truth he emphasized is that your mind is always under your authority. No matter what happens to you, the interpretation belongs to you alone. Two people can experience the same event and walk away with completely different emotional realities. One breaks under pressure, the other grows stronger. The difference is not the event, but the mindset. This is why Stoicism is not about avoiding pain, it is about refusing to be destroyed by it. You also need to understand that discomfort is not your enemy. Most people spend their lives avoiding difficulty, but Marcus Aurelius saw it differently. Hardship builds character the way fire tempers steel. Without resistance, there is no strength. Every challenge you face is either shaping you into something stronger or revealing what still needs to be strengthened. The question is never, "Why is this happening to me?" but rather, "What is this teaching me?" There is also a lesson in how you treat your time. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself that life is short, not in a fearful way, but in a clarifying way. When you truly understand that your time is limited, you stop wasting it on anger, jealousy, and meaningless comparison. You start focusing on what actually matters: your character, your actions, and your contribution. Most people underestimate how much energy they waste trying to control others. But Stoicism teaches a different path. You cannot control how people behave, what they say, or how they perceive you. Trying to do so only drains your peace. What you can control is your response. That is where your power lives. Every time you choose calm over reaction, you reclaim a piece of your freedom. Another truth Marcus Aurelius lived by is that suffering often comes from imagination, not reality. The mind has a habit of exaggerating problems before they even happen. You suffer twice, once in anticipation and once in reality. But when you train yourself to stay present, most of those imagined fears lose their power. The present moment is almost always more manageable than the story your mind creates about it. There is also a deeper lesson about ego. Ego convinces you that you are the center of everything, that every insult matters, that every delay is personal. But Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself that the universe does not revolve around him, and it does not revolve around you either. When you release ego, you release unnecessary emotional weight. You stop taking everything personally and start seeing things more clearly. And perhaps one of the most overlooked lessons is this: discipline is freedom. Most people think freedom means doing whatever you want whenever you want. But Marcus Aurelius understood that without discipline, you are not free, you are controlled by impulse. True freedom is the ability to choose your response instead of being ruled by your emotions, habits, or cravings. Life will not become easier because you understand Stoicism, but you will become stronger in how you face it. And that strength changes everything. You begin to notice that problems don't disappear, but your reaction to them becomes more stable. And that stability is what most people spend their entire lives searching for without realizing it is already within them. If you are watching this and these ideas are resonating with you, then you are already ahead of most people. But awareness alone is not enough. You must practice it daily. Every moment is a chance to respond differently than you did yesterday. And if you want more lessons like this, deeper Stoic principles, mindset shifts, and practical ways to build emotional strength, then subscribe to the channel. This is where we break down ancient wisdom into real-life clarity you can actually use. Another lesson Marcus Aurelius never allowed himself to forget is that other people will always act according to their own understanding, not yours. This means betrayal, misunderstanding, criticism, and even cruelty are part of human behavior, not exceptions to it. When you expect people to always behave with wisdom, you set yourself up for disappointment. But when you accept that people are often driven by ignorance, emotion, or personal struggle, you stop being easily shaken by what they do. This does not mean you excuse harmful behavior, but you stop letting it disturb your inner balance. Marcus Aurelius trained his mind to see others as fellow humans navigating the same flawed existence. Some are unaware, some are struggling, and some are simply lost in their own ego. When you see people this way, anger loses its grip on you faster, and patience becomes easier to practice. Another powerful truth is that your perception shapes your reality more than the events themselves. A situation is never purely good or bad in itself. It becomes what your mind decides it is. Losing money can be seen as disaster or as a lesson in detachment. Failure can be seen as humiliation or as redirection. Even pain can be seen as punishment or as training. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself that meaning is assigned, not discovered. And if meaning is assigned, then it can be changed. You must also understand the importance of self-honesty. One of the hardest battles you will ever face is not with the world, but with yourself. It is easy to blame circumstances, people, or timing. But Stoicism demands that you look inward and ask the uncomfortable question, what part of this is mine to fix? Growth begins the moment excuses end. Marcus Aurelius did not write to appear wise, he wrote to correct himself. That level of honesty is rare, but it is where real transformation begins. There is also a lesson in emotional restraint. Most people believe expressing every emotion immediately is healthy, but Stoicism teaches the opposite. Not every thought deserves action, and not every emotion deserves expression. There is power in pausing before reacting. In that pause, you regain control. You choose response over impulse. And in that small gap, your character is revealed. Another overlooked principle is acceptance of change. Nothing stays the same. Your mood, your circumstances, your relationships, and even your identity are constantly shifting. Fighting change creates suffering. Working with it creates peace. Marcus Aurelius saw change not as destruction, but as the natural order of existence. When you accept that everything is in motion, you stop demanding permanence from temporary things. You also need to recognize that comparison is one of the fastest ways to destroy your peace. There will always be someone ahead of you in some area of life. If you measure your worth by others, you will never feel enough. Stoicism redirects your focus inward. Your only real competition is who you were yesterday. That is the standard that actually matters. Another deep lesson is that your actions define you more than your intentions. Many people think good intentions are enough, but Marcus Aurelius understood that character is proven through behavior. You are what you consistently do, not what you occasionally intend. This means discipline is not optional, it is identity. You are also reminded that external validation is fragile. If your sense of worth depends on approval from others, you will constantly be unstable. Praise can disappear overnight. Opinions can change in a moment. But self-respect built on discipline and integrity remains steady even when no one is watching. That is the kind of foundation Stoicism builds. There is also a quiet but powerful lesson about simplicity. Much of human suffering comes from unnecessary complexity. Too many desires, too many distractions, too many opinions competing for attention. Marcus Aurelius often returned to simplicity of thought: do what is right, accept what is outside your control, and focus on what improves your character. When life becomes complicated, Stoicism brings it back to clarity. And perhaps one of the most important lessons of all is this: you are always capable of choosing virtue in any situation. No matter how unfair life feels, you still retain the ability to act with patience, courage, honesty, and discipline. Circumstances may limit your options, but they do not remove your character. That is your true power. When you begin to live with these principles, something subtle starts to change. You become less reactive, more grounded, and harder to disturb. Life does not stop being difficult, but you stop being easily broken by it. And that is the real goal of Stoicism: not a perfect life, but a stronger mind. If you are still here, it means these ideas are not just entertainment for you, they are something you are ready to apply. And that matters more than anything. If you want to continue building this kind of mindset, stay with this channel. Subscribe so you don't miss the next lesson, because what we will explore next goes even deeper into mastering emotions, discipline, and mental clarity in a world designed to distract you. Another lesson Marcus Aurelius never allowed himself to forget is that pain and discomfort are not signs that something is going wrong in life. They are often signs that life is actively shaping you. Most people assume a good life should feel easy, but Stoic thinking challenges that idea completely. A life without resistance produces no strength, just comfort. And comfort, when overindulged, slowly weakens the mind. He understood that pressure reveals character. When things go smoothly, anyone can appear composed. But when pressure rises, truth is exposed. This is why difficult moments are not punishments, but tests of what you have trained your mind to become. Instead of resisting hardship, Stoicism teaches you to meet it with awareness and ask, what part of me is being developed here? Another important lesson is that peace does not come from changing everything around you, but from changing what you expect from everything around you. Many people suffer because they expect life to be fair, people to be consistent, and outcomes to always match effort. But reality does not follow emotional expectations. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to expect imperfection, unpredictability, and change. And because of that, nothing surprised him enough to destroy his inner balance. You must also understand that your attention is one of your most valuable resources. Where your attention goes, your life follows. If you constantly focus on negativity, you strengthen it. If you focus on distractions, your purpose weakens. But if you deliberately choose to focus on what is within your control, your actions, your thoughts, your discipline, your life begins to align with clarity instead of chaos. Another deep Stoic truth is that suffering often comes from resistance to what already is. When something happens, the event itself is neutral. The suffering increases when the mind argues with reality. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to stop resisting what cannot be changed. Not because he agreed with everything that happened, but because fighting reality only multiplies pain without producing solutions. There is also a lesson about identity. Most people attach their identity to roles, achievements, or opinions of others. But these things can shift instantly. Stoicism teaches that your identity should be rooted in your character, not your circumstances. You are not your job, your failure, your success, or your past. You are your ability to act with reason, discipline, and integrity in the present moment. Another truth Marcus Aurelius lived by is that every day is a new opportunity to reset your mindset. The past is no longer in your control, and the future has not arrived yet. The only real moment you ever own is now. And within this moment, you always have the power to choose your attitude. That realization alone can transform how you approach life. You also need to understand that anger is often a sign of misplaced expectations. When people or situations don't behave the way you expected, frustration rises. But Stoicism teaches that expectations should be aligned with reality, not fantasy. The world is not obligated to meet your emotional standards. Once you accept that, emotional control becomes much easier. Another lesson is that greatness is built in silence, not in attention. Most people want results immediately and recognition quickly, but Marcus Aurelius understood that real growth happens quietly over time. Discipline practiced when no one is watching is what builds strength that everyone eventually notices. The foundation of greatness is repetition, not applause. There is also a powerful reminder about mortality. Thinking about death is not meant to create fear, but perspective. When you understand that life is limited, you stop wasting energy on meaningless conflict and shallow distractions. You begin to prioritize what truly matters: peace, integrity, purpose, and contribution. Awareness of mortality sharpens your focus on living properly, not endlessly. Another important principle is emotional independence. If your mood depends on external events, you are constantly vulnerable. But when your emotional state is grounded in internal discipline, you become stable regardless of circumstances. Marcus Aurelius trained himself not to be emotionally controlled by praise or insult, success or failure. That level of stability is what Stoicism aims to develop. You must also recognize that most unnecessary stress comes from trying to control outcomes that are not yours to control. Effort is yours. Results are not. Once you fully accept that distinction, you stop obsessing over outcomes and start focusing on execution. That shift alone reduces anxiety and increases effectiveness. And finally, one of the deepest lessons is this: life is always happening in your favor if you are willing to learn from it. Even setbacks, delays, and disappointments can become teachers if you stop viewing them as enemies. Marcus Aurelius did not seek a life without problems. He sought a mind capable of handling any problem. When you start applying these ideas consistently, your mindset begins to change. You become less reactive, more intentional, and harder to disturb. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become stronger than your circumstances. If you are still watching, it means you are serious about building that kind of mindset. So don't just let this be inspiration, turn it into practice. And if you want more lessons like this, deeper Stoic principles, mindset training, and mental discipline that most people never learn, then subscribe to the channel. More content like this is coming, and it is designed to help you think clearer, stay stronger, and live with more control over your life. Another lesson Marcus Aurelius constantly reinforced is that most of your suffering is self-created through judgment, not circumstance. Two people can experience the same setback, yet one remains calm while the other collapses emotionally. The difference is not the situation, it is the interpretation of it. Stoicism teaches that your mind is always adding meaning on top of reality, and often that meaning is heavier than the event itself. When you begin to observe your thoughts instead of obeying them, something powerful happens. You realize that not every thought deserves belief, and not every feeling deserves action. Many thoughts are just noise, reactions shaped by fear, ego, or habit. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to pause and question his inner narrative instead of blindly accepting it as truth. Another important principle is that external validation is unstable and unreliable. If your confidence depends on praise, you will constantly feel insecure, because praise is temporary and inconsistent. Today people may admire you, tomorrow they may ignore you. Stoicism redirects your foundation inward. Your worth is not something granted by others, it is something built through discipline, honesty, and self-respect. There is also a lesson about patience with life's timing. Most people suffer because they want results immediately. They expect success, clarity, or stability to arrive faster than reality allows. But Marcus Aurelius understood that everything unfolds in its own time. Rushing life does not accelerate outcomes, it only increases frustration. Patience is not passivity, it is trust in process combined with consistent action. Another truth is that your environment influences your mind more than you realize. The people you surround yourself with, the content you consume, and the conversations you engage in all shape your thinking. Stoicism encourages awareness of this influence. If you constantly expose yourself to negativity, comparison, or distraction, your mind will reflect that environment. Guarding your attention is guarding your peace. You must also understand that discipline is not something you do occasionally, it is something you become. Many people treat discipline as a temporary effort, but Marcus Aurelius treated it as identity. He did not act disciplined when it was convenient. He trained himself to act with reason even when emotions pushed in the opposite direction. That consistency is what builds real inner strength. Another deep lesson is that resentment is self-poisoning. Holding anger toward others does not harm them, it only disturbs your own peace. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that letting go of resentment is not about excusing behavior, but about refusing to carry unnecessary emotional weight. The longer you hold anger, the longer you stay chained to what hurt you. There is also the principle of focusing on usefulness over recognition. Many people waste energy trying to be seen, appreciated, or validated. But Stoicism shifts focus to contribution. The question becomes, is what I am doing useful, necessary, and aligned with my values? Recognition may or may not come, but usefulness always builds meaning. Another lesson is that fear often exaggerates the future. The mind has a tendency to project worst-case scenarios that rarely happen. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to return to the present moment, where most fears lose their power. When you stay present, you deal with reality instead of imagined disasters. You also need to understand that self-control is freedom. Without self-control, you are controlled by impulses, habits, and external triggers. With self-control, you regain authority over your actions. Stoicism is not about restriction, it is about mastery. The more control you have over yourself, the less control the world has over you. Another important idea is that clarity comes from simplicity. When your life, thoughts, or priorities become too scattered, confusion increases. Marcus Aurelius often returned to simple principles: do what is right, accept what is outside your control, and let go of what does not serve your character. Simplicity is not weakness, it is mental clarity. And finally, one of the most powerful Stoic lessons is that your life is defined by how you respond, not what happens to you. Events will always be unpredictable, but your response is always available to you. That space between stimulus and reaction is where your true power lives. When you begin applying these lessons consistently, your mindset shifts in a noticeable way. You become calmer under pressure, more intentional in your decisions, and less disturbed by external noise. Life does not become perfect, but your relationship with life becomes stronger. If you are still here, it means you are not just consuming ideas, you are looking for transformation. That is rare. So stay with this channel. Subscribe and keep watching, because the next lessons will go even deeper into Stoic discipline, emotional mastery, and mental strength that can completely reshape how you handle life, pressure, and success. Another lesson Marcus Aurelius repeatedly returned to is that most people suffer not because life is unbearable, but because they refuse to accept what is already happening. Resistance creates tension. Acceptance creates clarity. This does not mean surrendering to chaos, but recognizing reality as it is before trying to improve it. You cannot solve what you refuse to see clearly. When something goes wrong, the Stoic response is not emotional denial or blind optimism. It is clear observation: what exactly happened, what is within my control, and what is not. That simple shift removes emotional confusion and replaces it with direction. Marcus Aurelius trained his mind to respond to facts first, feelings second. Another deep truth is that inner peace is not found in perfect conditions. If your peace depends on everything going right, you will never truly have peace. Life is too unstable for that. Instead, Stoicism builds peace internally, so it remains steady regardless of external conditions. This is why Marcus Aurelius could remain composed even in political pressure, war, and personal loss. You also need to understand that most distractions are not accidental, they are chosen escapes. People often avoid discomfort by turning to noise, entertainment, or constant stimulation. But avoidance does not remove problems, it delays them and often strengthens them. Stoicism encourages facing what is uncomfortable early, so it does not grow into something overwhelming later. Another important lesson is that your mind becomes shaped by what you repeatedly expose it to. If you feed it anger, it becomes reactive. If you feed it comparison, it becomes insecure. If you feed it discipline, it becomes stable. Marcus Aurelius treated his mind like something that needed daily training, not occasional correction. There is also a powerful reminder that most battles in life are internal. External challenges matter, but internal responses determine outcome. Two people can face the same difficulty, but the one with stronger mindset will always navigate it better. This is why Stoicism prioritizes internal mastery over external control. Another principle is that suffering often increases when you attach identity to outcomes. If success defines your identity, failure will destroy your confidence. But if your identity is rooted in effort, discipline, and character, then outcomes become feedback instead of judgment. Marcus Aurelius separated self-worth from results, and that is where emotional stability begins. You must also understand that delay is not denial. Many people assume that because something is not happening quickly, it will never happen. But life does not operate on instant timelines. Stoicism teaches patience without surrendering effort. You continue doing what is right without demanding immediate reward. Another lesson is that your words should be measured, not reactive. Marcus Aurelius believed speech should serve purpose, not emotion. Speaking in anger often creates consequences you later regret. Learning to pause before responding protects your peace and your relationships. There is also the idea that character is revealed in private moments. Anyone can act disciplined when being watched, but true Stoic strength is built when no one is there to approve or judge you. What you do in silence shapes who you become in public. Another important lesson is that life does not owe you comfort or fairness. Expecting life to be fair creates constant disappointment. Instead, Stoicism teaches preparedness. You do not wait for life to become easy, you train yourself to handle difficulty when it arrives. You also need to recognize that overthinking is often a substitute for action. The mind creates endless scenarios when action feels uncomfortable. Marcus Aurelius valued movement over mental loops. Clarity often comes after action, not before it. And finally, one of the deepest Stoic truths is that every moment is an opportunity to practice virtue. Whether things are going well or badly, you always have a choice: to act with patience, honesty, courage, or discipline. That choice is always available, regardless of circumstance. When you live by this principle, your life begins to shift. You stop feeling like a victim of events and start acting like the author of your responses. That is where real strength begins. If you are still watching, it shows you are not here for motivation alone, you are here for mindset change. So stay connected to this channel. Subscribe for more Stoic teachings, because what comes next will go even deeper into mental discipline, emotional control, and building a mindset that cannot be easily shaken by life. Another lesson Marcus Aurelius never stopped reinforcing is that nothing external can truly harm your inner character unless you allow it. People can insult you, situations can frustrate you, and life can test you, but none of these can corrupt your mind without your permission. The real danger is not what happens outside of you, but how quickly you surrender your judgment to emotion. This is why Stoicism constantly brings you back to awareness. When you become aware of your reaction, you create space between stimulus and response. In that space lies your power. Most people lose control because they react instantly. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to slow that moment down mentally, so reason could guide action instead of impulse. Another powerful truth is that most of what you fear will never happen, yet you suffer as if it already has. The mind has a habit of building stories that feel real but are not real. Stoicism teaches you to challenge these stories. Instead of asking, "What if everything goes wrong?" you learn to ask, "What is actually happening right now?" This brings your mind back to reality instead of imagination. You must also understand that comparison steals your presence. When you constantly measure your life against others, you disconnect from your own progress. Marcus Aurelius focused inward because he understood that every person is fighting a different battle in different conditions. Comparison does not create improvement, it creates dissatisfaction. Another lesson is that emotional reactions are often delayed habits, not immediate truths. When something triggers you, your response is usually shaped by past experiences, not present logic. Stoicism teaches you to question that reaction instead of obeying it. Just because you feel something strongly does not mean it is accurate or useful. There is also a deep reminder that unnecessary desires create unnecessary suffering. The more you attach happiness to external things, money, approval, status, the more fragile your peace becomes. Marcus Aurelius simplified his desires so that his mind would not be constantly pulled in different directions. Less dependence creates more stability. Another important principle is that life is not designed to meet your expectations, it is designed to unfold. When you accept this, frustration decreases significantly. Expectations create resistance, and resistance creates suffering. But acceptance creates adaptability, and adaptability creates strength. You also need to recognize that most emotional pain comes from repetition in thought. The event may last seconds, but your mind can replay it for days. Stoicism teaches you to stop feeding thoughts that do not serve your growth. Not every memory deserves attention. Not every thought deserves continuation. Another lesson is that discipline in small things builds strength in big things. Marcus Aurelius did not build mental strength in moments of crisis alone. It was built in daily choices, small decisions, and consistent self-control. Strength is not sudden, it is accumulated. There is also the idea that your life becomes shaped by what you tolerate. If you tolerate excuses, you build inconsistency. If you tolerate distraction, you lose focus. If you tolerate negativity, you weaken your mindset. Stoicism encourages you to become conscious of what you allow into your life because tolerance shapes identity. Another truth is that peace is not the absence of problems, but the presence of perspective. Problems will always exist. What changes is how you interpret them. Marcus Aurelius did not wish for a problem-free life. He trained for a mind that could remain steady regardless of problems. You also need to understand that waiting for motivation is a mistake. Motivation is temporary and unreliable. Stoicism emphasizes action based on principle, not feeling. You do what needs to be done because it aligns with your values, not because you feel inspired in the moment. And finally, one of the most important Stoic lessons is that every day is an opportunity to reset your mind. No matter what happened yesterday, you are not required to carry it forward. Each moment gives you a fresh chance to think differently, act differently, and become better than you were before. When you begin to apply these lessons, something subtle but powerful happens. You stop being easily disturbed by life. You start responding with intention instead of emotion. And slowly, your mindset becomes your greatest source of strength. If you are still here, it means this is not just content for you. It is something you are trying to live by. So stay connected. Subscribe to the channel for more Stoic wisdom, because the next lessons will go even deeper into emotional mastery, self-control, and building a mindset that remains strong no matter what life throws at you. Another lesson Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself of is that life does not pause for your comfort. Everything continues moving whether you are ready or not. Time does not slow down for confusion, fear, or hesitation. This is why Stoicism emphasizes presence and action. The more you delay important decisions out of fear, the more control you give to uncertainty. Instead of waiting for perfect conditions, Marcus Aurelius trained himself to act within imperfect conditions. Because perfection never arrives. There will always be uncertainty, resistance, or inconvenience. The disciplined mind does not wait for life to become easy, it learns to function clearly even when life is difficult. Another powerful truth is that most people overestimate how much attention others are giving them. A large portion of anxiety comes from the belief that everyone is watching, judging, or analyzing your life. In reality, most people are too focused on their own struggles to constantly observe yours. Stoicism helps you step out of that imagined spotlight and return to reality. You must also understand that emotional intensity does not equal truth. Just because something feels overwhelming does not mean it is accurate or permanent. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to separate emotion from judgment. Feelings are real, but they are not always reliable guides. They pass. But decisions made during emotional storms often leave long-term consequences. Another lesson is that self-improvement is not a destination, it is a continuous process. There is no final moment where you become complete. Every level of growth reveals a new level of awareness. Stoicism teaches humility in progress. No matter how far you go, there is always more discipline to build, more clarity to develop, and more patience to practice. There is also a reminder that frustration often comes from expecting others to think like you. But every person operates from their own experience, upbringing, and understanding. Marcus Aurelius did not expect uniform thinking from humanity. Instead, he adjusted his expectations and focused on his own responses. Another important principle is that the mind becomes stronger through controlled exposure to difficulty. Avoiding all discomfort weakens resilience. But facing manageable challenges regularly builds emotional endurance. This is why Stoic practice often includes voluntary discomfort, not for suffering, but for strengthening inner stability. You also need to recognize that most problems are smaller when acted upon than when imagined. The mind tends to magnify difficulty before action begins. But once you engage with the situation, clarity increases and fear decreases. Action often dissolves anxiety faster than thinking ever can. Another deep lesson is that anger is often a defense mechanism for ego. When things do not go as expected, ego feels challenged, and anger tries to restore control. Marcus Aurelius observed this pattern within himself and worked to interrupt it. Instead of reacting, he would pause and examine whether anger was truly necessary or just ego being disturbed. There is also the principle that external success without internal discipline leads to instability. Many people achieve goals but remain internally unsettled because they never train their mind. Stoicism prioritizes internal order first, because without it, external success feels empty or stressful. Another truth is that clarity comes from reduction, not addition. When life feels overwhelming, adding more information or more worry does not help. Instead, Marcus Aurelius reduced things to essentials: what is happening, what is within my control, and what action is needed now. Simplicity brings direction. You must also understand that consistency is more powerful than intensity. One strong effort does not reshape your life. Repeated disciplined action does. Stoicism builds identity through repetition, not occasional inspiration. Small actions done consistently create long-term transformation. Another lesson is that most regret comes from inaction, not failure. People often regret what they avoided more than what they attempted and failed at. Marcus Aurelius valued action aligned with virtue, even when outcomes were uncertain. Because character is built through effort, not results. And finally, one of the deepest Stoic lessons is that you are always capable of returning to yourself. No matter how chaotic life becomes, no matter how far you drift into stress or distraction, you can always return to clarity in the present moment. That ability to reset mentally is one of the strongest forms of freedom. When you begin to live with this awareness, life does not necessarily become easier, but you become steadier. Less reactive. More grounded. More intentional. If you are still here, it means these ideas are starting to shape your thinking, not just entertain it. So stay with this channel. Subscribe for more Stoic teachings, because the next lessons will continue building on this, helping you develop stronger discipline, clearer thinking, and emotional control in a world that constantly tries to pull you away from it. Another lesson Marcus Aurelius never let himself forget is that every situation contains both difficulty and opportunity, depending on how you choose to see it. The mind naturally focuses on what is uncomfortable first, but Stoicism trains you to look deeper. Behind every setback is a chance to build patience. Behind every failure is a chance to refine strategy, and behind every delay is a chance to develop discipline. Nothing in life is purely wasted unless you refuse to learn from it. Marcus Aurelius didn't see obstacles as interruptions to his life path, but as part of it. This mindset removes the idea that life is supposed to be smooth. Instead, life becomes a continuous training ground for character. Another powerful truth is that most emotional suffering comes from attachment to how you think things should be, rather than how they are. Expectations create friction with reality. When reality does not match expectation, frustration appears. Stoicism teaches you to loosen your grip on rigid expectations so you can respond to reality with clarity instead of resistance. You must also understand that self-control is not suppression of emotion, but direction of energy. Marcus Aurelius did not deny emotions, he guided them. The difference is important. Suppression builds tension, but guidance builds strength. You are not meant to eliminate emotion, but to prevent it from making decisions for you. Another lesson is that external chaos does not require internal chaos. Life can be unpredictable, people can be inconsistent, and circumstances can be unstable, but your mind does not have to mirror that instability. Stoicism builds a stable inner center that does not shift every time external conditions change. There is also the reminder that your reputation is not fully within your control. People will form opinions based on limited information, personal bias, or misunderstanding. Marcus Aurelius understood that chasing universal approval is impossible. Instead, he focused on acting rightly, regardless of perception. When you accept this, you stop wasting energy trying to manage everyone's opinion. Another important principle is that mental strength is built in moments of discomfort, not comfort. Comfort feels good, but it does not challenge your thinking or discipline. Difficulty forces growth. That is why Stoicism does not avoid hardship, it uses it as a tool for development. You also need to recognize that procrastination is often emotional avoidance disguised as logic. The mind creates reasons to delay action because action feels uncomfortable. Marcus Aurelius valued immediate engagement with responsibility. The longer you delay what needs to be done, the heavier it becomes in your mind. Another deep lesson is that peace comes from alignment, not achievement. You can achieve goals and still feel unsettled if your actions are not aligned with your values. Stoicism emphasizes living in accordance with reason and virtue, not just chasing external outcomes. Alignment brings lasting peace, achievement alone does not. There is also the principle that most conflict is unnecessary when ego is removed. Many arguments are not about truth, but about pride. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that winning an argument is meaningless if it costs inner peace. Silence and restraint can sometimes be more powerful than being right. Another truth is that your habits silently build your future identity. What you repeat daily becomes who you are over time. Stoicism focuses on repetition of discipline, not occasional effort. Small choices accumulate into character long before major results appear. You must also understand that emotional resilience is not about never feeling pain, but about not being controlled by it. Pain will happen, loss, disappointment, rejection, but Stoicism teaches you to experience it without losing direction. You feel it, but you do not surrender to it. Another lesson is that clarity improves when you remove unnecessary mental noise. Overthinking, unnecessary comparison, and constant distraction cloud judgment. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to simplify thoughts so that decisions could be made with clarity instead of confusion. And finally, one of the deepest Stoic lessons is that you always have the power to begin again in this moment. No matter what has happened in the past, no matter how unfocused or overwhelmed you have felt, the present moment is always a fresh starting point. You are not trapped by yesterday unless you choose to remain there mentally. When you begin applying these principles consistently, your mindset becomes less reactive and more deliberate. You stop being easily pulled by external events and start operating from internal stability. If you are still here, it means you are not just listening, you are absorbing. So stay with this channel. Subscribe for more Stoic wisdom, because what comes next will continue strengthening your mindset, sharpening your discipline, and helping you build emotional control in a world that constantly tests it. Another lesson Marcus Aurelius kept returning to is that life is not asking for your approval before it unfolds. Events will happen in ways you did not plan, people will act in ways you did not expect, and circumstances will shift without warning. Stoicism teaches you to stop negotiating with reality and start responding to it. The moment you accept that life is not designed to obey your preferences, your emotional resistance begins to weaken. This acceptance is not passive resignation. It is clarity. Because only when you stop arguing with what is happening can you see what to do about it. Marcus Aurelius did not waste energy wishing situations were different. He focused on what actions remained available. That shift, from resistance to response, is where mental strength begins. Another powerful truth is that your suffering often increases when you label situations as unbearable or too much. The mind uses language to intensify pain. But Stoicism teaches you to strip situations down to facts without exaggeration. Instead of, "This is ruining my life," it becomes, "This is difficult, and I will respond to it." That small change in framing reduces emotional overload. You must also understand that most people are not against you, they are simply focused on themselves. Offense often comes from misunderstanding this. When someone ignores you, criticizes you, or behaves selfishly, it is rarely personal in the way you assume. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to interpret human behavior with compassion instead of immediate judgment. This reduces unnecessary conflict and emotional tension. Another lesson is that your mind must be trained daily, not occasionally corrected. Just like physical strength fades without exercise, mental discipline fades without consistent practice. Stoicism is not something you read once, it is something you repeat, reflect on, and apply in small daily decisions until it becomes automatic. There is also the reminder that overreacting to small problems often makes them bigger than they are. A minor inconvenience, when met with anger or panic, becomes a major disturbance. But when met with calm observation, it remains what it is, a small problem with a solution. Marcus Aurelius understood that emotional escalation rarely improves outcomes. Another important principle is that comparison distorts reality. When you compare your worst moments to someone else's highlight moments, you create a false sense of lack. Stoicism brings you back to your own path. Your life is not a competition of appearances, it is a process of development. The only meaningful comparison is between your past and present self. You also need to recognize that most regret comes from ignoring what you already knew internally. People often feel inner conflict because they act against their own better judgment. Marcus Aurelius emphasized living in alignment with reason. When your actions match your values, internal tension decreases. When they don't, stress increases. Another lesson is that external praise does not guarantee internal peace. You can be admired by many and still feel unsettled within. Stoicism focuses on internal coherence rather than external approval. Peace comes from knowing you acted with integrity, not from how others respond to it. There is also the principle that discipline is built through repetition in ordinary moments. It is easy to act correctly when motivated or observed, but true discipline is shown in private, unglamorous situations, choosing focus over distraction, patience over reaction, and responsibility over avoidance. Another truth is that emotional reactions often feel urgent but are rarely necessary. Most situations do not require immediate emotional escalation. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to slow down his response, allowing reason to evaluate whether reaction was truly needed. That pause is where control is regained. You must also understand that peace is not something you find after life becomes perfect. It is something you practice while life remains imperfect. Waiting for perfect conditions guarantees lifelong dissatisfaction. Stoicism builds peace in the middle of imperfection, not after it disappears. Another lesson is that your identity should not be fragile. If your identity depends on success, failure will destabilize you. If it depends on opinion, criticism will disturb you. But if it is rooted in character, your choices, discipline, and integrity, it remains stable regardless of external changes. And finally, one of the most important Stoic truths is that you always have enough strength to respond to what is in front of you right now. Not tomorrow, not after conditions improve, now. Marcus Aurelius constantly returned to this idea. Whatever happens, you are not without the ability to respond with reason. When you begin to live with this awareness, life becomes less about controlling outcomes and more about refining responses. And that is where real strength is built. If you are still here, it shows you are not just interested in ideas, you are interested in transformation. So stay connected. Subscribe to this channel for more Stoic teachings, because the next lessons will go even deeper into mental resilience, emotional mastery, and building a mindset that remains steady no matter what life brings. Another lesson Marcus Aurelius repeatedly returned to is that your mind becomes what it repeatedly rehearses. If you rehearse anger, you become quick to anger. If you rehearse fear, you become sensitive to fear. If you rehearse discipline and rational thinking, you become more stable under pressure. Stoicism is, in many ways, mental training through repetition. This is why Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself constantly. He was not trying to impress anyone, he was training his own mind. He understood that clarity is not a one-time realization, it is a daily discipline. Every thought you allow to repeat itself becomes a pathway your mind follows more easily in the future. Another powerful truth is that most people suffer more in anticipation than in reality. The mind creates scenarios, predicts outcomes, and builds emotional weight around events that may never happen. Stoicism brings you back to the present moment, where most imagined fears lose their power. The future exists only in your thoughts, not in your experience. You must also understand that emotional maturity is the ability to respond without being controlled by impulse. Marcus Aurelius did not eliminate emotions, he refined his response to them. Instead of reacting immediately, he allowed reason to intervene. That space between emotion and action is where wisdom is formed. Another lesson is that true freedom is internal, not external. You can be physically free but mentally trapped by fear, anger, or dependence. Conversely, you can be physically constrained yet mentally free if your mind is disciplined. Stoicism focuses on building internal freedom that cannot be taken away by external circumstances. There is also the reminder that most things are not as urgent as they feel. The mind exaggerates urgency, making small problems feel immediate and overwhelming. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to slow down mentally and evaluate whether something truly required immediate emotional reaction or simply calm attention. Another important principle is that your interpretation of events determines your emotional state more than the events themselves. Two people can lose the same opportunity. One becomes bitter, the other becomes focused on the next step. The difference is interpretation, not circumstance. You also need to recognize that people will often act from their own limitations, not from an intention to harm you. When you understand that most behavior is driven by ignorance, insecurity, or stress, you stop taking everything personally. Marcus Aurelius used this understanding to maintain emotional distance from unnecessary conflict. Another lesson is that progress is often invisible while it is happening. Growth rarely feels dramatic. It feels like repetition, patience, and small improvements that are hard to notice day by day. Stoicism teaches you to trust process over immediate results. There is also the principle that mental strength is built through restraint. Anyone can react instantly, but it takes discipline to pause, think, and respond intentionally. That restraint is what separates impulsive living from deliberate living. Another truth is that many problems shrink when you stop feeding them with attention. Constantly thinking about a problem often gives it more power than the problem itself has. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to redirect attention toward what was actionable, not what was emotionally draining. You must also understand that life does not need to be fully understood to be lived well. The desire for complete certainty often creates hesitation and anxiety. Stoicism encourages you to act with reasonable clarity, even when full certainty is not available. Another lesson is that character is built in moments of inconvenience. When things are easy, there is little to test your discipline. But when things become inconvenient, your response reveals your level of training. Marcus Aurelius saw every inconvenience as a chance to practice virtue. And finally, one of the deepest Stoic truths is that every moment offers a choice, to act with reason or to react from emotion. That choice never disappears. It remains available even in the most difficult situations. And that is where your true power always exists. When you begin to live with this awareness, your mindset becomes less reactive and more intentional. You start responding instead of spiraling, observing instead of assuming, and choosing instead of reacting. If you are still here, it means you are building something beyond motivation. You are building mental discipline. So stay connected. Subscribe to this channel for more Stoic wisdom, because the next lessons will continue shaping emotional strength, clarity of thought, and a mindset that remains steady no matter what life throws at you. Another lesson Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself of is that the only moment you ever truly have is the present one. The past is memory, and the future is imagination. Yet most people live emotionally trapped between both. They regret what is gone or worry about what has not arrived, while missing the only moment they can actually influence. Stoicism brings your attention back to now, not as a motivational idea, but as a practical anchor. In the present moment, you can think clearly, act wisely, and correct your direction. Outside of it, you are only rehearsing thoughts without control. Marcus Aurelius understood that peace is not found in time travel of the mind, but in grounded attention. Another powerful truth is that most emotional pain is prolonged by repetition. An event may last a few seconds, but the mind can replay it endlessly, keeping the emotional wound open. Stoicism teaches you to interrupt this cycle. Not by denial, but by redirecting attention toward what is useful, actionable, or neutral. You must also understand that other people's opinions are unstable because they are shaped by shifting emotions, limited knowledge, and personal bias. If you build your sense of self on public perception, you will always feel unstable. Marcus Aurelius chose internal standards over external approval because internal standards remain consistent even when the world changes its mind. Another lesson is that frustration often comes from expecting life to operate like a system of fairness. But life does not distribute outcomes based on emotional fairness. It operates through complexity, timing, effort, and unpredictability. Stoicism removes the demand for fairness and replaces it with responsibility for response. There is also the reminder that discipline is most powerful when no reward is immediate. Anyone can stay consistent when results are visible, but Stoic discipline is built when progress is slow, invisible, or uncertain. Marcus Aurelius valued consistency over recognition because consistency is what shapes character over time. Another important principle is that your mind will always try to avoid discomfort, even when discomfort is necessary for growth. This avoidance shows up as procrastination, distraction, or overthinking. Stoicism trains you to act despite discomfort, not wait for comfort before acting. You also need to recognize that many problems become heavier simply because they are not addressed early. The mind increases pressure on unresolved issues. Marcus Aurelius emphasized early action, even in small steps, because action reduces mental weight. Another lesson is that emotional intelligence includes knowing when not to react. Not every comment requires a response. Not every situation requires correction. Not every insult deserves attention. Stoicism teaches selective engagement so your energy is preserved for what actually matters. There is also the principle that suffering increases when you resist learning from difficult situations. Pain itself is unavoidable, but suffering often comes from refusing to extract meaning or adaptation from it. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to ask what each situation could teach him rather than why it was happening to him. Another truth is that your internal dialogue shapes your emotional experience more than external reality. The way you speak to yourself during difficulty determines whether you become overwhelmed or resilient. Stoicism encourages a calm, rational internal voice instead of a dramatic or fearful one. You must also understand that freedom is not doing whatever you want, it is being able to choose your response regardless of impulse. Without self-control, desire becomes direction. With self-control, reason becomes direction. Marcus Aurelius built his life around reason guiding action, not emotion guiding behavior. Another lesson is that most things you worry about lose importance with time. What feels urgent today often feels insignificant later. Stoicism helps you evaluate situations from a longer perspective so temporary emotions do not create permanent reactions. And finally, one of the deepest Stoic insights is that you are always in a position to act with virtue, regardless of circumstances. Even when control is limited, your response is not. Patience, honesty, discipline, and courage are always available choices. When you begin to live with this understanding, your life does not become free of problems, but your relationship with problems transforms completely. You stop being overwhelmed and start becoming steady. If you are still here, it means you are not just consuming ideas, you are building awareness. Stay connected to this channel. Subscribe for more Stoic teachings, because the next lessons will continue helping you develop emotional control, mental clarity, and a mindset that remains unshaken even in difficult times. Another lesson Marcus Aurelius constantly returned to is that most of what disturbs your peace is not the world itself, but your interpretation of it. The same event can feel like destruction or direction depending on how you frame it. Stoicism teaches you to step back from automatic interpretation and examine things with clarity before reacting emotionally. When you stop immediately labeling situations as good or bad, you give your mind space to think more rationally. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to observe events first, and judge them later, if judgment was even necessary. This habit reduces emotional distortion and increases mental stability. Another powerful truth is that unnecessary complexity creates unnecessary suffering. The mind becomes overwhelmed when it tries to manage too many desires, worries, and expectations at once. Stoicism simplifies thinking, Focus on what is within your control, release what is not, and act with integrity in the present moment. You must also understand that emotional reactions often feel justified in the moment but appear exaggerated in hindsight. Anger, panic, and frustration can feel completely valid while they are happening, but later, the same situation often looks smaller and less important. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to recognize this distortion in real time. Another lesson is that external success without internal order creates instability. Many people achieve goals but remain mentally restless because they never built inner discipline. Stoicism prioritizes internal structure first, clarity of thought, emotional control, and self-respect, because everything external sits on top of that foundation. There is also the reminder that most people live according to impulse rather than principle. Impulse changes depending on mood, environment, and pressure. Principle remains steady. Marcus Aurelius built his life around principles because they provide direction even when emotions are inconsistent. Another important principle is that you are responsible for the state of your attention. If your attention is scattered, your life feels scattered. If your attention is controlled, your life becomes more intentional. Stoicism trains you to direct attention toward what is useful rather than what is distracting or emotionally stimulating. You also need to recognize that waiting for motivation often leads to delay. Motivation is unreliable and temporary. Marcus Aurelius relied on discipline instead, doing what needed to be done regardless of emotional state. This removes dependence on feeling ready before taking action. Another lesson is that most emotional suffering comes from resisting what has already happened. Once an event has occurred, fighting it mentally only prolongs discomfort. Stoicism does not ask you to like every outcome, but it teaches you to stop mentally resisting what cannot be changed. There is also the principle that small decisions shape long-term identity. Every time you choose discipline over distraction, you also need to recognize that most regret comes from ignoring what you already knew internally but did not act on. Many people feel inner conflict because their actions contradict their own understanding of what is right. Marcus Aurelius valued alignment between knowledge and action. Another lesson is that external chaos is not a threat to internal order unless you allow it to be. Life will always contain unpredictability, but your mind does not have to mirror that unpredictability. Stoicism builds an internal center that remains steady even when everything around you shifts. There is also the principle that your attention is a form of energy, and where you place it determines the quality of your life. If your attention is constantly pulled toward negativity, comparison, or distraction, your mindset reflects that. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to direct attention toward what is useful and within control. Another truth is that many problems feel overwhelming only because they are not broken down into smaller, manageable parts. The mind exaggerates complexity when it views everything at once. Stoicism teaches you to reduce problems into clear, actionable steps. You must also understand that patience is not an activity. It is disciplined waiting combined with consistent effort. Marcus Aurelius did not sit idle. He continued doing what was necessary without forcing immediate results. That balance is what creates long-term strength. Another lesson is that anger often feels justified, but it rarely improves outcomes. It distorts thinking, increases conflict, and drains energy. Stoicism does not deny emotion, but it questions whether reacting emotionally is actually useful in the moment. And finally, one of the deepest Stoic truths is that every day is another opportunity to align your actions with your values. No matter what happened yesterday, today gives you a clean opportunity to act with more discipline, patience, and clarity. When you begin to apply these ideas consistently, you stop feeling controlled by external events and start operating from internal stability. That is where real change begins. If you are still here, it means you are building awareness beyond surface motivation. Stay connected to this channel. Subscribe for more Stoic teachings, because the next lessons will continue strengthening your mindset, emotional control, and ability to remain steady in a chaotic world. Another lesson Marcus Aurelius kept returning to is that your mind will always try to tell you stories about reality, but not all stories are true. The mind exaggerates, distorts, and fills gaps with assumptions. Stoicism teaches you to separate what is actually happening from what you are telling yourself is happening. This distinction is powerful, because most emotional suffering does not come from events themselves, but from the narrative built around them. When you learn to question your internal story, you stop reacting to illusions and start responding to facts. Another important truth is that life is constantly testing your ability to stay steady under pressure. Not to punish you, but to reveal what you have not yet mastered. Marcus Aurelius did not see challenges as interruptions to his peace, but as opportunities to strengthen it. Every difficult moment becomes a mirror reflecting your level of discipline. You must also understand that reacting emotionally gives away control. The moment you react without thinking, you allow external events to dictate your internal state. Stoicism is about reclaiming that control through awareness. You feel the emotion, but you do not surrender decision-making to it. Another lesson is that most people underestimate the power of small daily choices. Big transformations are not created by rare moments of inspiration, but by repeated decisions made in ordinary situations. Marcus Aurelius valued consistency in small things because that is where character is built. There is also the reminder that nothing external can guarantee lasting peace. If your peace depends on success, relationships, or circumstances, it will always be fragile. Stoicism builds peace from within so it remains stable regardless of external change. Another principle is that frustration often comes from trying to rush processes that naturally take time. Growth, success, healing, and understanding all develop gradually. Marcus Aurelius accepted that timing is not always under human control, but response always is. You also need to recognize that many emotional struggles are intensified by resistance to simple acceptance. Accepting reality does not mean liking it, it means seeing it clearly without denial. Once you accept what is real, your energy can shift from resistance to action. Another lesson is that comparison steals your awareness of progress. When you constantly look at others, you lose sight of your own development. Stoicism redirects attention inward, because your true competition is the person you were yesterday. There is also the principle that discipline is strongest when it is not dependent on mood. If you only act when you feel motivated, your consistency will always be unstable. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to act based on principle, not emotion. Another truth is that most fears lose power when faced directly. The mind tends to amplify uncertainty, but action reveals reality. Many things that feel overwhelming in thought become manageable in practice. Stoicism encourages engagement instead of avoidance. You must also understand that criticism from others often says more about them than it does about you. People project their own experiences, frustrations, and perspectives when they judge others. Marcus Aurelius learned not to take every opinion personally. Another lesson is that peace is not found in controlling life, but in controlling your response to life. Once you accept that you cannot manage everything outside you, you stop exhausting yourself trying. And finally, one of the deepest Stoic truths is that every moment is another chance to return to clarity. No matter how distracted, emotional, or overwhelmed you become, you can always pause and reset your thinking in the present moment. When you live with this awareness, you stop being carried away by every external wave and start standing firm internally. If you are still here, it means you are not just watching, you are building a different mindset. Stay connected. Subscribe for more Stoic teachings, because the next lessons will continue helping you strengthen your discipline, sharpen your thinking, and remain grounded no matter what life brings. Another lesson Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself of is that everything in life is temporary, including both pain and pleasure. Nothing stays in one form forever. Difficult seasons pass, and so do good ones. This awareness removes the illusion that any situation is permanent, which reduces both panic in hardship and overattachment in success. When you truly understand impermanence, you stop clinging too tightly to moments. You begin to experience life more fully without fearing loss at every step. Stoicism does not remove joy, it removes dependency on it staying unchanged. Another powerful truth is that most internal conflict comes from wanting reality to be different from what it already is. The mind says, "This shouldn't be happening," and that resistance creates emotional friction. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to replace resistance with observation. This is what is happening, now what is the correct response? You must also understand that discipline is not built during moments of motivation, but during moments of resistance. Anyone can act when energy is high. The real test of character is what you do when you feel like doing nothing. Stoicism is built in those moments where action is difficult but necessary. Another lesson is that overthinking is often the mind trying to simulate control. When people feel uncertain, they overanalyze in hopes of finding certainty. But Marcus Aurelius understood that thinking alone cannot replace action. Clarity often comes after movement, not before it. There is also the reminder that other people's behavior should not define your emotional state. If your peace depends on how others act, you are constantly vulnerable. Stoicism teaches you to anchor your emotional stability internally, not externally. Another principle is that emotional maturity is the ability to delay reaction until reason has spoken. The impulsive mind reacts instantly, the trained mind pauses. That pause is where wisdom enters. Without it, you are driven by reflex instead of reflection. You also need to recognize that most disappointments come from expectations that were never communicated, confirmed, or realistic. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to adjust expectations to reality instead of forcing reality to match expectations. Another lesson is that attention is powerful, and what you repeatedly focus on becomes mentally larger. If you focus on problems constantly, they grow in perceived size. If you focus on solutions, your thinking becomes more constructive. Stoicism trains your attention to serve clarity, not anxiety. There is also the principle that hardship often reveals strengths you did not know you had. Without pressure, certain abilities remain dormant. Marcus Aurelius viewed difficulty as a way of uncovering hidden capacity rather than simply suffering. Another truth is that you cannot always choose what enters your life, but you can always choose what stays in your mind. Thoughts may appear automatically, but you decide whether to entertain them or release them. That choice is part of mental discipline. You must also understand that self-respect is built through action, not affirmation. You do not gain self-respect by thinking about discipline, you gain it by practicing it. Marcus Aurelius valued behavior over intention. Another lesson is that calmness is not weakness. Many people confuse emotional restraint with lack of strength, but Stoicism shows that control under pressure is one of the strongest forms of power. Reacting less does not mean feeling less, it means thinking more clearly. And finally, one of the deepest Stoic truths is that every moment gives you an opportunity to act with virtue regardless of circumstances. Even when situations are unfair, confusing, or difficult, you still retain control over your response. When you begin living this way, your mindset becomes less reactive and more intentional. Life still moves, but you are no longer constantly shaken by it. If you are still here, it means you are developing awareness that goes beyond surface motivation. Stay connected. Subscribe for more Stoic teachings, because the next lessons will continue strengthening your discipline, emotional control, and mental clarity in a world that constantly challenges all three.